Yo, it's Brock, and I'm here today to talk about the Canon EOS R6 and why it is the most underrated camera of 2021. Let me give you some reasons why. So this camera came out last year in 2020 alongside with the Canon EOS R5. The A7S III was released shortly after, but I think the Canon R6 kind of flew under the radar in a lot of these big name cameras have come out because it was kind of a lower tier, as a mid-price range compared to the A7S III and R5. And you get a lot of the same features for over $1,000 less. So first off, I want to start with photo specs. This is an area of controversy around this camera, I think, because of the 20 megapixel sensor. Is it enough? Am I going to be able to tell a difference from coming from an EOS R with 30 megapixels, which is my situation, or even compared to an R5, right? Honestly, I can't. Unless I was printing these on massive billboards or big prints, I probably wouldn't be able to tell a difference. Then you would probably notice it. But otherwise, I do not notice in editing. The photos look phenomenal. The images off this sensor just look beautiful and great in general. I've had no issues with photos. And you're also gaining, if you're coming from an EOS R, you're gaining 12 frames a second mechanical shutter and then 20 frames a second on silent electronic shutter, which is awesome. The autofocus is great. So to me, this camera, from a real world use perspective, less focusing on the technical side of things, is a killer photo camera. It's the most fun I've had shooting photos with a camera since I probably bought my 5D Mark IV. Another thing I don't really see people talk about when it comes to the photo side is the IBIS, how good IBIS is for photo. Yes, there's the wobble issue in video, which is a thing. We're gonna talk about it. But other than that, when it comes to photo, the IBIS is awesome for long exposures and low light situations when you maybe need to roll that shutter back to 1/50th or even 1/30th or even below. You can get some really sharp handheld shots with the IBIS enabled because it just allows you to get these stable shots. So that's another big plus for me. Another thing, editing these files from the photo perspective. 20 megapixel files are easier to edit, easier to store. They take up less space, and the fact that they still look as great as they do, I see no issue there. For the average wedding photographer, product photographer, like all these different things, portraits, just basic stuff like that, this camera is gonna be killer. Now let's talk video, right? This is probably what I do the most with this camera. And let me just say, having full frame 4K, game changer. Having full frame 4K 60, game changer. Coming from an EOS R, like I said, having to crop in anytime I wanted to shoot in 4K and no 4K slow-mo at all was a big annoyance. The single most reason this camera is the biggest upgrade from the EOS R is the 10-bit color. It makes a inconceivable difference if you've only been shooting on 8-bit for your career as a videographer. The ability you have in color grade to push and pull the image, get the colors you want out of it, manipulate it how you want to create a look is next level compared to 8-bit codec. I do wish we had C-Log 2 or 3, but I can deal with that. They do have an update for the R5 now with C-Log 3, I believe, or 2. I can't remember which one they added, but I wish they would do that for the R6, but I doubt it's going to happen. But regardless of that, the 10-bit color makes a huge difference with dynamic range, being able to pull stuff back out of your image, especially in combination with C-Log. Even though it doesn't have the dynamic range of 2 or 3, it's still great. So that's a huge, huge, huge win for me. The other thing that's a huge win, no crop on 4K. I will say there is a slight crop when you go to 4K. I don't really know why. I can't figure out why Canon even bothered with it because it's so minimal. You don't even really, it's almost unnoticeable, but it's still there. I can't really figure out like what their reasoning behind that was. I'm sure they have it. If they don't, who knows? They might not because it's Canon. But the 4K 60, that's probably number 2 main reason why I love this camera and why to me it's a massive upgrade over the EOS R. Event style videography where you're just trying to capture these candid moments. Like I recently shot a local university's graduation with me and my friend Riley. We do some freelance stuff on the side. Shout out Riley, you could follow him. He has a YouTube channel. Subscribe to him. I'll throw it in the description. But we went and shot this, and having that full frame 4K slow-mo was huge. I mean, it was just awesome to be able to really capture these candid moments, these celebrations of a graduation, these students graduating medical school. It was just killer. So another huge win for the R6. Low light. This camera is really, really freaking good in low light. Coming from an EOS R, it's worlds better than that. It's worlds better than my 5D Mark IV. It's the best camera I've ever used in low light. I've never really shot with a bunch of Sony stuff. So I know Sony is still probably low light king, especially with the A7S III, but this camera's really, really good. And I think that's another benefit you're gonna get over the R5 because it's only 20 megapixels. It's just gonna do better in low light. So that's a huge plus for photo and video. It looks great. Let's talk ergonomics just for 1 second. I do want to touch on this because this camera just feels really good in the hand. I have big hands, so I don't really like tiny cameras, especially me shooting handheld. I shoot a lot of stuff handheld, so having a small camera that I just feel like I'm gonna squeeze to death if it's just harder to hold. This camera feels great in the hand. Ergonomically, it's great. Even compared to the R, just the original EOS R, I always felt that the grip just felt a little skinny and just small, and this one just feels so much better in the hand. So that's another win for me. So for a second, can we just thank Canon for getting rid of the stupid touch bar and putting back the joystick and the scroll wheel? That alone was the most frustrating thing when I switched from a 5D Mark IV to the EOS R, was losing the joystick to move the focus point around and losing the scroll wheel to scroll through photos, adjust your aperture quickly, like all of that stuff that I use those joysticks for and those buttons for, they finally put back in the R6 and the R5. Freaking love it. Thank you, Canon, for doing that. Never should have left to begin with, but we forgive you for it. It's cool now that it's back. So I do want to touch on some of the things I do not like about this camera, just to be transparent with you. One being the IBIS wobble is definitely a thing in video mode. When you're shooting like wider than 24 millimeters, that's when I started to notice it. The other thing that it's not really something that I've found an issue with, but I've heard others talk about, is I know the R6 and the R5 had the overheating controversy coming out, especially the R5 when they first launched. I have not encountered that with the R6. I know some people have. Like I said, you saw some footage from this graduation I shot. I live in North Carolina. We were outside for probably 2 to 3 hours in the sun. It wasn't that hot, but it was probably 75 degrees, and I had no issues. So I have not experienced that yet. I am on the latest firmware, so they may have adjusted that a little bit and fixed it. But just keep that in mind. If you do any long form content, you may run into the overheating issue. I'm really not entirely sure, but I just want to throw that in there. This has not been a super technical review, and I honestly just didn't really want it to be. I feel like there's enough of those out there on the internet that you can go find where people are comparing, the specs and all these different things side by side with different cameras. The truth is, today in 2021, you can find any camera on the market that's of the prosumer level and get a great image out of it if you know what you're doing. Because ultimately, creating great photo and video, the gear is probably 30% of the quality that you're going to get out of it. It's a matter of your knowledge of lighting and how to color grade, how to edit. All those things are really what's going to do the most. Your ability to storytell. These are all the things that are really going to matter. But the gear can make your job easier or harder. And this camera, to me, ultimately just makes my job easier. Forget if it's Canon, Sony, Panasonic, Fujifilm, whatever it may be. If the camera makes your job easier and allows you to create better, quicker, more efficiently, that's what should matter. Do you enjoy using it? It doesn't really matter if it's Canon, Sony, whatever your brand loyalty is. I happen to stay with Canon. I've always been with Canon only because I just enjoy using their cameras. Sure, they have their issues. No camera is going to be perfect. Ultimately, it's a combination of your tools, your ability as a creator and storyteller, and then your knowledge of the gear that you have in your hand. If you know what you're doing, you can create great stuff. So that's gonna be it for me today in this video. If you want more information or want to see more content around the EOS R6, let me know in the comments. I'll be glad to make a video about it in more detail or comparing it to something else that you have in mind. So let me know about that. If you do like what you see and you like this video and you enjoyed it, hit that like button, maybe even subscribe to the channel. There's gonna be more videos like this on gear, just the creative process in general, how I create through photo and video, and also just general tech stuff in general, because it's just kind of what I'm into. So hit that subscribe button if any of that sounds interesting. And again, thank you for watching. I'll catch you guys in the next one.